Hello and welcome to another episode of the Pick Six podcast. I'm your host DPZ, and with me is Drake at Drakes_PC. Drake, how you doing?
DP,
How you doing, buddy?
DPZ, I'm doing great. It looks like I'm better than you. You're sitting in that, Washington area traffic, but you got the sunglasses on, like Hollywood Hulk Hogan, NWO style. Looking forward to some fiery hobby takes for me.
Yes, definitely. No, so I'm commuting, going like 5 miles an hour for the next like hour, I think. So it's still safe for me to do this. My eyes are fixed on the road, and I'm more or less listening, and have the camera position so I can we can talk and have a conversation and get this episode recorded. Just showing you how committed and dedicated Drake and I are, being two time zones apart and having a busy family life and work life. We still want to talk about cards because we love them so much. So happy to be here.
Absolutely. But like you said, we got to keep safety first. You hear people say don't text and drive. We should probably say don't podcast and drive, but we'll make an exception today.
Yeah, well, I'm not. I'm gonna stay safe and keep my eyes on the road here, and we're gonna talk. So, what do we got? What do we want to talk about? Nationals it's next week. It's around the corner. I think I'm gonna have you look out for a card for me when you're there, just as a good friend. And since I cannot be there, I'll be there in spirit with you. But I mean, you got to be feeling pretty good and getting excited about the National. And on top of that, I don't know. What do you want to tackle first, bud?
Yeah, well, first I'll share. I actually had a mail day today. A lot of people talk about leading up to the National, saving money, don't buy cards, all that sort of stuff. And then sometimes cards just pop into your hemisphere and you're like, hey, you know what? If that's a card I saw at the National, that's one that I would snag. So I'll share it real quick. This is the Peyton Manning Prime Choice Reserve PSA 10 rookie card out of 1998 Upper Deck Choice. It's got this slab guard on it. It's first card I have that's got the slab guard, I think it's called, on it with the light blue. So Upper Deck Choice was a kind of a lower end product in 1998. He's got a Prime Choice Reserve card that he's in a Tennessee uniform. Also, this one as well. It has like a cracked ice look to it, which I think is really cool. And says Prime Choice Reserve on it. And I'll flip it over. These are numbered out of 100. So this is number 9 out of 100, and it's a PSA 10 Pop 8. So I actually saw this one pop up in a Facebook group, and some people may not be familiar with this, but it was in a deal or no deal format type. And essentially what that is the person doesn't put a price. They just throw the card out there and say deal or no deal, and people in the comments basically make an offer, and the owner can come back and say either deal or no deal. And so you can kind of look at the comments and see what people are offering for the card and maybe know kind of where your offer might stand, if it's realistic for the card, that whole sort of thing. So that's actually the first time I've purchased a card in that format, and I feel like I got a pretty fair deal. I felt like the card, the dealer sold it to me for was fairly priced. It's one you don't see pop up very much. I think the last public sale of that card was probably October of last year. So, pops up once or twice a year. So, very excited to add that one to my collection.
Very cool. Very cool. I don't have anything especially exciting. My mail day was like 4 different PSA 9 87 Flair basketball player cards for my set I'm putting together. So nothing of note. I mean, the players are just random players. Nothing exciting about them, but just 4 more cards closer to completing that set. So that was pretty cool to find some deals or some auctions. I always wait for auctions to pop up for those particular cards, and then I'm able to get them at the demand price right now, which is pretty low. It's a very inexpensive way to have some fun putting together a set, and I'm just a little bit closer. So 4 cards closer for me. But 4th of July went well for you, I hope.
Yeah, it was fantastic. Family went down to the lake. We saw some fireworks. Both my kids actually learned how to kneeboard, which was awesome. That's always exciting when you see your kids succeed in something and learn something new, and you can kind of teach them something. And they picked up on it fairly quickly. They they learned how to kneeboard a lot faster than I did. So I guess they get their athletic talent from their mom and not from me. So, but we had a great time. It was extremely hot. 4th of July, the heat index was 115 degrees. So we were melting, had to spend lots of time in the water and that whole sort of thing. But had a great time with family, friends, things like that. So in fact, the friend of mine who's coming with me to Nashville, Dustin, not the Dustin we know, a different Dustin. He actually was down with us, and we were talking national and that whole sort of thing. So it was good.
Cool. Very exciting. Very exciting. Yeah, just pretty quiet on the front down here for the Zender household. We hunkered down and hung out in our neighborhood, and we also spent some time with my in-laws and their family. That was fun. Had a good time. So what do we got for topics today? What are we talking about, brother?
Yeah, so the first topic actually that came in, I'm sure everyone knows about the card heist at the Dallas Card Show last weekend, which is still wild to me. They had a card show on 4th of July. I mean, you've got to be hardcore committed to go to a card show on the 4th of July, I'll say, but I know lots of people went. But, it was the theft of about $2 million in cards, maybe plus that. It seemed to be a very organized type thing. There were lots of cameras out there. Lots has been discussed about this, in terms of what happened. They still haven't found the thieves, found the cards. Obviously with those being vintage cards, they're not numbered. It would be very easy for the thieves to take those cards from the slabs, slowly kind of resubmit them either to PSA or other grading companies, things like that. It would be tough to identify. So anyways, certainly a bad situation. But the question asked her, and this actually came from Ben McDaniel, and this came from Facebook. But he said, what can shows do to provide more security and prevent what happened in Dallas from happening again? And I'll just kind of share my perspective on this as someone who goes to shows and things like that. So, the first thing is the Dallas show, like many shows, they do provide security cameras. So I think they were able to get video footage of the thieves from that. There's also uniformed police there because I've been to the Dallas Card Show a few times. There's uniformed cops. I know at the National they do hire off-duty policemen to work the show and walk the show and things like that. But certainly in a case like this, if you're holding $2 million plus of cards in a case, hire yourself a security guard. I think to flip the question around, it's not so much what can shows do. I think it's what do people that have that type of inventory, what they should do better. And in that case, I think, you should hire a security guard, right? You should keep your cards in a safe. Don't just keep them in a Zion case sitting out on the table. Throw your cards in the safe. I know at the National, several folks will rent safes. And that's where they keep their cards at night, or, if they're not standing at their table, then that's where the cards go. Would put them in a safe. Me as a walker, not as a dealer, I always have my backpack. In my backpack, I have my cards inside my backpack, and they're locked. You have the zippers and that go together. I've got locks on my backpack to keep someone from just walking up as I'm talking to somebody, undoing the zipper, things like that. And my backpack is secured at the front. So I'm 6'5", I'm 235 pounds. It's going to take a big old boy to take me out. So, and that's not a challenge. That's just something like that. And certainly, try to stay in groups. Don't find yourself, by yourself in a back alley and expect the best thing to happen. So that's just a few tips I'll share. The last thing that I'll share, and then I'll flip it over to you if you have any thoughts, DPZ, but certainly make sure you have insurance on your cards, and there's collector's insurance, there's dealer's insurance, things like that. So that, worst case scenario, something happens like this, you may not get your cards back, but you have an insurance policy to fall back on. Make sure you have the right insurance policy. You can't have a collector's only policy, take your cards to a card show, they get stolen, and expect that you're going to get, the insurance compensation or the insurance claim for those. So certainly do your research with any type of collectibles insurance policy, but I would advise anybody that has any significant amount of money in cards to make sure they have a collectibles insurance policy for their cards in case a worst case scenario like this happens. So do you have other thoughts, DPZ?
I actually don't. You covered that topic very thoroughly, so no, nothing to add here. So you can just move on to the next subject. I think you covered it well.
All right, sounds good. Well, I will ask this question and I'll let you answer to start. This comes from Instagram. Ryan Bitter asks, "How has your style of collecting evolved, and where do you see it in 5 to 10 years?"
That is a really good question, Ryan. Thank you for that. Actually, this gives us something to talk about. I feel like it's constantly evolving. I feel like I've veered. When I first started, I was just learning what the space was about. What cards mattered. I knew rookie cards mattered, but outside of that, I knew nothing about the '90s. I knew nothing about inserts, and the altered fake cards, and all of that. How to navigate all of that. I had to befriend a lot of great people in the hobby to learn how to recognize the fraudulent stuff and the nefarious actors. Blowout forums is very helpful. So I started there. I kind of grew through that, and then I honed it in. And I know we talked earlier about this, and some folks, and everybody collects differently, and that's okay. I really just focused it on Ken Griffey Jr. He was who I entered with, and who I still focus on now. Obviously, that's the worst kept secret on the show is that I collect Ken Griffey Jr. But I also have the '87 Fleer, the Michael Jordan. I got one Michael Jordan, and I have a couple Kobe's, and so I guess my collecting, the way I've evolved myself over the past 5 years, is I've really focused in on what I want to have and hold long term. And I use the auxiliary stuff to sort of fund that. The problem is you get to a point where you don't have as many bigger cards to use and sell and move to create capital to buy the cards you want. So like we've talked about in past episodes, then you have to be very focused on, okay, if I'm going to spend X amount of cash on a card now, or couple it with some capital from selling cards, and then add some of your own cash to that, you really got to make sure it's a card you want to spend that money on, because the market's so volatile. You can sell, you can buy where you feel like is a low price or a good price, a fair price for that particular card, and then a few months later it sells for much less, and you're like, what happened? Why did it sell for so much? What It just happens. So you just have to want the card and not have to worry solely about the investment you're making in it. So I think that's where people will evolve to. I also see a migration to '90s again. I know that's a place I love, and I'm not trying to hype it up, but I think there's a lot of folks that are in spitballing cards. Just a shout out to them, and Scotty B Cards, and Filmington, and Ty from Sports Card Investor. There's a lot of great. There's other guys blabbing about SlabMags, I believe, is the other gentleman, and they have just an amazing podcast. Something to go check out if you haven't already. They recently had an episode talking about the '90s cards and the inserts, and sort of like looking for rarity, scarcity, and a fun way to collect during an era that there was a lot of competition. It wasn't a monopoly of just Panini and Topps, and you had all these different companies trying to outdo each other. So the design was beautiful and amazing, and it was very innovative, and that was a really great time to collect cards, because you're going to get all these great designs, and you can chase different players. You don't have to collect the big players. You can collect whoever it is you collect, and you can still get some pretty amazing cards at reasonable prices. And so that episode was really, I thought it was a great one, and it suggested to me that people are just, there might be some folks getting tired of the modern cards, and this doesn't help fanatics obviously, but it just, there's so many of them out there. There's so many different serial numbered versions of any particular player or card, and I think it's going to wake people up, 30 to 50-year-olds, in that range, that they're going to want to go back, nostalgically go back to the time that they collected, or even not the time that they collected, but the time they really consumed sports. We all consumed sports during that time, right? The '90s. We watched the finals, and the World Series, and the NHL Stanley Cup Finals, and all these different it was like that time that a lot of us grew up in. May not have been collecting cards, but we're very familiar with the players and we're fans of those players during that era. So it presents an opportunity for us to collect there, not so much from an investment standpoint, but from a collecting standpoint. Literally going and collecting cards or putting together sets or whatever it may be, as versus in the modern cards now where there just seems to be so many of them. Now, there's still cool cards during the modern era, but maybe a lot of us older, I always call us older guys, but those guys in that demographic, guys and gals, will want to go and collect those types of cards. That's just me. So I see a collecting evolving over time to where people are becoming more focused on what they're collecting and why. There has to be a why behind it. And you're going to have to move cards here every now and then as you continue to focus in on what it is you really like, what it is you really want. Do you want something that's just a really low pop and a high grade because you just want it? You want to own something that's scarce or rare of a player that matters? Or do you want a card aesthetically that's so pleasing, it looks so amazing, it may not be as popular or sought after, but it looks just awesome. But that could be more affordable.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I agree with that. And I'll ask you a question real quick, and I'll kind of give my take. But the last part of his is like, where do you see it in 5 to 10 years? And I know you're really hardcore on Griffey, but do you see yourself continuing to buy more Griffey cards and kind of making that collection wider, or do you see it more like staying on the top of the top and continuing to level up and continue to get just the best of the best and having, I'll say, lower quantity of cards but higher quality? And do you see yourself maybe adding a side PC? Is there anybody you see yourself getting into in the next 5 to 10 years?
That's a great question. I think there'll be two things I feel like I'm going to be doing. I feel like where I'm going, I'd love to add another really high profile Kobe card, like an insert. And there's a card that I'm chasing right now that I really love. It's 1999 Fleur Mystique Raise the Roof. It's out of 100, just a beautiful, beautiful card. Aesthetically, it's like one of the most beautiful things you've ever seen. And you're going to pay around the price. I'm going to have to sell something to buy it. I might have to let go of a Griffey that I love to get it. But, just having a handful of really awesome cards of some of the bigger players like Jordan, Kobe, and Griffey, and those players that I enjoy and care about. Like I have a really cool Barry Bonds. But then I think after that, it's just focusing in on getting cards from players. Like I'm looking at the 81 Topps Magic Johnson PSA 10 or the Larry Bird PSA 10 and 81 Topps. Like getting a card from every player that's important. Like, the 80s, obviously they're rookie, but their first standalone card, in my opinion, looks way cooler. Especially Magic's. Magic's card looks really cool. Maybe getting a PSA 10 of that card, so I'll have a Magic card, and then get a Larry Bird card that matters, and then get keep going down the line, so that maybe pick a bunch of like Hall of Fame GOATs or a Tom Brady card that really matters. I see myself sort of like building out curating a collection of the all-time greats and some of their best cards, and not like 10 of every player, but just maybe one. Right? I'll have a handful of Griffies, but I'll have one of everybody else. It's kind of where I'm at.
Yep, I love it. I love it. So to give my perspective on this is, I think looking back how things have evolved, when I returned to the hobby about 5 years ago, I found myself first starting like, hey, when I was in the late 90s, I was collecting Peyton Manning and I had a little Drew Brees collection and things like that. So I started to gravitate to those. But then, I started to find content creators, and, as I was getting back in the hobby, I wanted to hear other perspectives and things like that. And I didn't know, one person from the next. So I just started listening, and I'm like, wow, a lot of these people are saying I need to, if I want to make money, and there's ways to make money in this, but to do this, you've got to buy the next prospect and you've got to buy this type of card. And, don't waste your money on the GOATs because they're like the Apple stock where they're not going to grow fast, and they're slow movers and not much talking. And everybody was talking about prospects. And so looking at evolution, coming back 5 years ago, I was buying players and types of cards that other people were telling me to buy. And then I think the way that my collection or collecting habits have evolved is I say quickly, about a year and a half, I was like, no, I really don't care. And I've spoken to this before. I really don't care as much about these players, or maybe not that type of card. But I really want to focus in on Peyton Manning and focus in on Drew Brees. And, I grew up in Memphis and I loved wrestling. So let's dive deep into wrestling cards. And like, that's what appealed to me. And I wanted to get a collection that was truly unique to me. Now, do I have cards and parallels such as gold refractors and gold prisms and things like that are really popular amongst the hobby? Absolutely. I mean, we're all influenced one way or the other, whether we want to say it or not. But I feel like the player that I have in those types of cards, or the wrestler that I have in those types of cards, are guys that appeal to me. And so, and cards that look great. I shared earlier the Upper Deck Choice, Prime Choice Reserve Peyton Manning. Not many content creators or influencers are talking about Peyton Manning, right? And if they are, they're certainly not talking about a Prime Choice Reserve card. But to me, that's a great looking card. It appeals to me. It fits nicely in my collection. And so that's kind of where I'm at right now in my collection, is I love collecting things that look great to me. I love the rare and scarce, unique type stuff that you can't find every day. It's not the middle of the mall type stuff, as certain people say. And really kind of where I see my collecting evolving the next 5 to 10 years is I don't see myself getting into prospecting. I see myself continuing to, find those, rare and scarce Manning cards that may require some consolidation, which I don't think is a bad thing. I was commenting on someone's comment on the crossover, which will air on Friday night, about consolidating for me is not so much about trying to get the biggest and best cards just to show them off. It's really more of, it gives me a more manageable number of cards to enjoy, right? Because if I have cards in vaults and safes and Zion cases and all that, it's hard for me to truly enjoy like 300 cards. I'd rather have 25 cards that I know each and every one, everything about them. I know the history of the card, the set, the insert, parallel, things like that. So that's where I'm going in my collection. And there may be cards that I acquire today that maybe I don't want 5 to 10 years from now. It doesn't mean that I love the card any less or anything like that. It just means my collecting habits and styles have changed. So, anyways, that's my thought.
Yeah, I want to segue off a comment you made earlier. Is you said something about, I don't want to be influenced by other collectors and what they're buying and collecting. Which, and again, some of these folks they're just harmlessly talking about the stuff they enjoy and love. There's nothing wrong with that, and we do it too. And we'd hope we wouldn't influence anyone to go buy, Peyton Manning or Ken Griffey Jr. just because we're talking about it. But that just happens. It happens to all of us, because it's like this weird dopamine hit when you hear someone talking about a card or a player that you like and you already have, or a set you're into, or a card you have in high grade. You kind of get a little excited, like, oh wow, this might mean that there's other people appreciating it. This might mean it might go up in value, and you get kind of excited. Or on the other side of it, you're like, gosh, is this card the card to collect? I mean, is this the one that I should be? I've sent so many messages to people like, what do you think of this card? Is this a good card? I mean, is this a bigger card? What tier of importance is this card? And I found myself not doing that anymore, because I was like, every time I had to ask that question about that card, at some point I ended up selling it, because it wasn't a card that mattered enough to me where I could make a decision by myself with all the information that I have gained and learned over the however many years now, to buy it, and with full confidence that I'm comfortable having it and owning it regardless of what anybody else thinks of it. And I have a handful of cards now that I know how I got to that card, and in the ones I have in my collection right now, none of them are because someone said, hey, this is the card you need to have, this player. They're all cards that matter. The stories are crystal clear. This is exactly why this card's important, matters within the hobby, in the history of the hobby. They all have a place. They all have a place, and that's kind of exciting to me. I feel like you've arrived in your PC with some of these cards that you probably won't move on from when gosh, There's only so many of these, and especially in this grade, and I'm really lucky and glad I have it. I'm grateful I have it. And I don't need anybody to tell me it's a great card. I know it's a great card. And not only is it a great card because other people know it's a great card too, but because I love it. I love the way it looks. I love the story behind it. I love the importance of it, the provenance of it. I think that's important when you get to a point where you're not asking anybody for, hey, what do you think of this card? What do you think of that card? I mean, there's nothing wrong with asking questions about what's the history behind this set. Nothing wrong with that. And that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about if you're truly making a decision based off of someone else helping you understand how important the card is. While it's important to learn about it, making decisions because of that is a dangerous. So you got to find the line between learning and actually making the decision because of. And then sometimes people are trying to sell you a card, and they're going to build up the importance of that card to sell it to you. We all know we've all fallen victims of that once or twice. You just learn, right? You just learn as you go. But I'm with you. I think you bring it down to a manageable amount of cards where you can truly enjoy them. I mean, my number is probably 10 to 15, Drake, to be honest with you. And I have a very narrow focus of what I'm looking for. There's a handful of Griffies I'd love to own. There's a couple Kobe's I'd love to own. There's a couple Jordans I'd love to own. Obviously I just told you how my eye on the 81 Topps PSA 10s, but those are probably further back on because the grade is the only thing making that card, bringing the value to that card. And I think if I'm gonna go into a bigger card again, it's gonna have to have some sort of serial number. There has to be more. It cannot be manufactured scarcity in the sense of a pop, right? It has to be. There's only so many of these cards. They don't surface very often, and so I'm kind of veering back in that direction. And before I was going more towards the PSA 10s of 80s cards, and now I'm kind of going back to the 90s again. I just think we kind of we verve in and out, but we're always kind of honing in to the cards that are going to matter to us, that speak to us, that have the story. All of that needs to be in play for you to want to hang on to that card long term.
Yep, I agree and love it. So for those listening, YouTube, drop some comments. What do you think? What is your collecting like today? Talk about the way it's evolving, the way you think your collection may look in the next 5 to 10 years. Kind of what things are you thinking about looking forward, looking ahead? So drop a note in the comments. So I think we have time for one last topic. DPZ, you good?
Yeah, fire away.
All right. So this comes from Big Caesar's PC on Instagram. And I'll answer this real quick, and then I'll let you get your perspective on it. But does the mindset of grading for value have a negative impact on kids collecting? And in my opinion, I think the answer is no. I think it has a positive impact. I think our kids, our kids these days, and I'll say even older than my kids, they have a very entrepreneurial mindset. And whether it's going to YouTube and making content or doing something on TikTok or doing something like that, I think kids have an eye of like, man, I don't want to go work an 8 to 5 job like mom and dad and 401k and that's boring. I want to do something more exciting. Now, it may be a little more risky, but they want to do something a little bit more exciting. And so I think when, kids start to understand, hey, can buy this raw card off of eBay, or I can open up a pack of cards and I can spend a little bit of money and get it graded, and it increases the value by so much. And maybe if I don't have an attachment to that player or card, then I can sell it. And, I paid $20 for the card and $15 to grade, and I sold it for $100. Right? You've made $65. And then I think for kids, that's really neat. I mean, I think for grownups too, that's probably really neat. And I think we see a lot that do that. But I don't think that it has a negative impact on collecting for kids, and some kids may just want to buy a bunch of cards and have the cards and not worry about grading and things like that. But I think for some kids, if they have that entrepreneurial mindset, the ability to level up and make money, and maybe they put it back in the hobby, or they use it to buy a new gaming system or new sports equipment or something like that. I think, them seeing the opportunity to do that, I think, is a win. And I think we'll only see that segment grow within the hobby. What do you think?
I think I might take a bit of a different viewpoint on that. I don't know if I want kids to be concerned with value on cards when they're younger, because it's going to. I don't want them. I want them to enjoy the card. If you want to create collectors, then you want them to be appreciating the card as a card, and the aesthetic appeal, the player, or your player collecting because you're just a big, Bryce Harper fan, or you're a massive Trout fan, or Ellie De La Cruz, or any of these like athletes, or Justin Herbert. You collect them, you're excited about them, you watch them on TV, and you collect their cards because that's really cool to do. And when you add too much, when you're thinking about value too much, I think it takes away that innocence of the collecting. Is back when we were collecting, yeah, there's a little bit of that, but I wasn't thinking, oh, I'm gonna go flip this card and turn it into $25 from $1. I was like, oh crap, it's like I can't buy the 86 Donruss Jose Canseco because this guy says it's mint condition and he wants like $50 for it, and I'm never getting $50 as a kid. I don't know, man. I just feel like there's a time for that. I guess when you get older and you're able to, you have the income to do that. But I would want to lean into the collecting aspect, and I'd want our younger generation to be focused on collecting, because if they're not going to focus on collecting and they're going to be too concerned about value of card, then you're going to have there's no end user. That generation's not going to care about keeping the card. They're just always trying to pass it off like a hot potato. And if that's the mindset, then I'd be concerned about the future of the hobby from a generational standpoint. That's just me.
Yeah, I think that's a phenomenal point there, DPZ. I think it all starts with collecting, right? When we were kids, you were getting cards and opening up the packs, and you were excited when you got, your Jerry Stackhouse or your Todd Van Poppel, or, your, Bernie Kosar, or, Vinny Testaverde card or something like that. You weren't concerned about what it was worth, or, something like that. You just wanted to find out who your friends collected, and maybe you would trade and, things of that nature. So I think it's got to come in a priority order. If you're opening cards and you're going to your hobby shop or looking on eBay, just always trying to find value and always trying to make money and things like that, I think you're going to be disappointed, and that's, as you mentioned, that's not good for the future of the hobby. But I think if you come from a place of, hey, my ultimate goal is to collect, and if I can do this to help build my collection and kind of do it on my own, and I'm not always having to ask mom and dad for more money and more money and more money to just build my collection. If I can find a way to do that through, buying and selling cards and things like that, with the true number one focus on, hey, this is my collection, then I think that's probably a better route to go.
I mean, that's my whole point of, like, look at modern cards right now and you wonder why people are moving into the 90s and 80s nostalgic or vintage. It's because who's collecting those cards? Who do those cards matter to? I mean, the 90s, they matter to us because we've grown some attachment to them by learning stuff over the past few years, or we have nostalgic attachment because we used to own the cards when we were younger, or collected them or opened them in packs, or we know our parents had the vintage cards and we want, like, I love 69 Tops. My dad had those cards. My friends' dads had those cards. Like, there's a value. There's something there that's tying me to the card that makes it not just a transaction, but an experience and something to hold and something to have and to feel like, hey, I've got this. I own this card. I used to want it as a kid, and I have it. I have it in a high grade. How cool is that? Versus, it's just a transaction. Now, it's nothing wrong with, like, using cards to color up and get the cards you want, use them as cap. Nothing wrong with that. But when you're selling the kind of cards that you're selling, non-modern to get there, then those cards are most of the time landing in someone else's lap that wants them. I know I sold a handful of my Griffies to color up to get some Griffies that are still in the possession of the person that I sold them to. There's one I want back, and he won't sell it back to me because I wish I hadn't sold it. It's such a great card. I wish I hadn't sold it. It's a super rare one. Now I'm like dying to get it back, and there's only like 2 people that have it. So that happens too, right? So, but the modern stuff, what I worry about is, I know this is not the question, but the modern stuff, this new generation, I guess it does apply, is who's collecting those cards? Like, who's keeping those cards? I'm sure there are people, don't get me wrong, but who's keeping all of these modern cards? Because there's going to need to be somebody keeping them. I feel like modern cards are transactional. They're just transactions. They're just lottery tickets. They're just the Powerball ticket. They're not. Are they being collected? I mean, I know my son has a few he's hanging on to, but he's too young to understand all of this. I mean, who's collecting these cards? That would be my question, and that would be my concern if I'm a hobbyist and I want to see the future generations of the hobby prosper, and the hobby itself prosper in the future. Is you want people collecting cards, and these modern cards have to matter, and I'm concerned about that, because I wonder if Fanatics is now just going to milk it like they can, and we're going to have even more, and it's going to be like, all right, are we just using these as like pieces to move around and sell, and who's the last person to end up with the card that's going to lose their hat? I don't know. That's the stuff I worry about, right?
Yep, I agree. If you're buying cherry blossom refractors because you think it's going to be worth infinitely more in 10 years, I would urge extreme caution. So anyway, I think that's a great point to end on. I know we're about 35, 36 minutes. DPZ is hopefully getting close to his home. So bring it home, DPZ.
Yeah, slowly but surely, I'm definitely getting home, and it's probably going to start picking up here, so it's probably a good time to end it to be safe. But I want to apologize for any loud noises, auxiliary noises you're hearing from my microphone, but I appreciate you hanging in there with us. This is definitely not something I like doing, but we wanted to get an episode in. I have a tight schedule today, so does Drake. This was kind of the only way to make it happen. Very busy week for both of us, but we enjoy the heck out of talking about cards and are happy to do it whenever we possibly can. And we hope you enjoyed this conversation, and because I know I do. I always love talking cards. And thanks for tuning in. Comment below what you think. Are we off base? Are we on the mark? What do you think? We always love the feedback. And hey, we'll see you guys next week. Take care.
All right, DPZ. Thank you. Have a good one.